Not sure if we started.
No, I hadn't started it, so thank
Okay,
you so much. Yeah, we had a
thanks.
couple of people reach out and ask. They say that they registered, but they can't attend today. So I'll send out the recording afterwards so people can check it out if they're not able to join us. Thanks, Kirsten. So just how did we come to the topic for today's meeting? At previous Lake Stewardship Community of Practice meetings, we've discussed things like water quantity issues. We've met some of Alberta's newest lake stewardship groups. We've talked about engagement and advocacy. And today we're talking about recreation. And where this comes from is at our annual conference this past September. Dr. David Barrett and I, he's from the University of Calgary, organized a session where we worked with attendees to identify their lake research questions of interest. We wanted to know, like, what question do you want answered? Who do you think should answer this question? Is it a master's student, a PhD student, undergrad student? How long would it take to answer that question? And so we built out this database of research questions. And I took a look at what are the broad themes around those research questions. And I have that presented on the pie chart here. But I was surprised to see that one of the biggest themes that emerged from those research questions were questions related to lake recreation. I would have assumed that all of the questions were going to be about cyanobacteria and water quality, and that wasn't the case. We had a lot of questions about water quantity and a lot of questions about recreation. So I thought, well, let's try and answer some of those questions for folks and see what's happening in other jurisdictions. These are some examples of the questions people submitted to us. What is the boating capacity for small lakes? What is the impact of boat traffic on lake health? What's an appropriate buffer zone to mitigate damage to shorelines? These are the types of questions that our stakeholders and attendees had. And we don't have a lot of information on this in Alberta. And so I turned to a group outside of our jurisdiction to help us answer those questions. So that's how we came up with our speaker for the day. So with that, I'm excited to welcome Diana Piquette to our Lake Stewardship Community of Practice. Diana has over 30 years in senior leadership roles for major technology companies. She spent 19 years with Microsoft, where she built and grew pioneering business units. And she also led Microsoft Canada's intellectual property advocacy and anti-piracy initiatives, where she was part of their global team. She was the vice president of sales and marketing for a global legal industry software company, and is currently president of Axiom Group, where she consults technology companies on growth and governance. Dan is a member of the Institute of Corporate Directors and holds an executive MBA from Ivey School of Business at Western University. She's a director for the Federation of Ontario Cottage Association, part of Transport Canada's Recreational Boating Advisory Council, and a business coach for the Ivey International Leader Project. She's also the chair of Safe Quiet Lakes. Somehow I didn't have that in the bio, but, but that's really key. She is the chair of Safe Quiet Lakes, which we're going to learn a little bit about here today. She's passionate about business results and committed to making a positive difference. So with that, I invite Diana to share your screen and lead us through your presentation, and then there will be time for questions after her presentation. If you do have questions in the meantime, feel free to throw those into the chat and we'll ask those to Diana afterwards. So thanks, Diana, for joining us, and we'll try sharing your screen here.
Okay, it sounds great. Thank you. And it's wonderful to meet all of you. I am actually originally from Edmonton, from Alberta. I was born in Edmonton. And when we were kids, we had a family cottage on sort of Lake Lac La Biche in the Plamondon region. So yes, I feel like I'm already a part of you. So are you able to see my screen right now?
Yeah, that looks really good.
Okay, awesome. So I think I'll start by just sort of outlining what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to give you a little bit of information about Safe Quiet Lakes, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the Canadian regulatory framework. I know from just seeing what Brad put up that there was some questions about that. So I do sit on Transport Canada's Advisory Council for recreational boating. So hopefully I'll be able to answer a few questions in that capacity. And then after that, I'm going to talk about the Federation of Ontario Cottage Association, of which I'm also a director, because again, when Brad went through what was of interest to you today, some of it sort of blended over from Safe Quiet Lakes into FOCA. So I'll be addressing that at the end. So first of all, Safe Quiet Lakes. We have been a not-for-profit organization since 2012. We started in the Muskoka area. It was a group of executives from lake associations, and lake associations deal with so many different laking issues, everything from algae to water quality to taxes for residents versus cottagers. And there didn't seem to be any one group specifically focused around recreational boating. So we created Safe Quiet Lakes, and our mission is to be a leading voice in promoting safe, quiet waterways and respectful boating practices through education, advocacy, and legislative change. And to the left of my screen, you'll see something called the Boaters Code. And this is something that we developed in our first year that basically gives a guideline on how to be a respectful boater. And we have these posters set up at every marina where people go to pick up their boats or go to rent boats, as well as public docks. Safe Quiet Lakes is a very data-driven organization, and we started that way right from when we started the organization. So we have, since 2012, every 4 years conducted research, and this research is done by a professional research organization, and it tests questions on everything that has to do with the lake and recreational boating. Last survey was in 2021, and we had over 6,000 respondents. That made this survey the largest lakefront survey across all of North America. And the fact that we have been doing this year over year means that we also have a very good longitude of information that can sort of look at trends, because it's been evolved over time. We do have another survey planned for this summer, so that will be our fourth. And we've already got the research firm organized and going through the questions. There seems to be some interest in some new areas, so we are looking at how to incorporate those and keep the longitude. So the takeaway is, in every one of these research studies, people told us what they loved the most about their lake experience. And it was about sitting on their dock, listening to nature, and feeling safe and at one with nature. And so when we measured people's lake experience, that was sort of the baseline. Every one of those surveys, they told us that was what was most important. And then when they talked about their lake experience that year, it was in relation to that. And this last study had the most change we've seen in all of the 3 studies that we've done. And the changes were not positive. It was a general feeling that the lake experience was deteriorating because of an increase in wakes, an increase in boat noise, and an increase in speed and size of boats that were out there. And we monitor how people enjoy the lakes. What do they do? And it was, again, a huge shift in 2021. There was a 22% increase in people enjoying the lakes on human-powered vessels. So that's massive over a 3-year period. And what I mean by human-powered vessels is people are kayaking, and they are paddle boarding and doing other things where it is just themselves powering their actual vessel. In addition to that, the size of boats, recreational boats, has really increased, and the amount of PWCs or sea-doos has increased by close to 30%. And so if you look at those two things colliding together, you've got more people almost 25% increase in people trying to enjoy the lake, doing things that are human powered, and then you have the boats getting bigger and more PWCs and sea-doos. There's starting to be a clash, and people have reported that that has deteriorated their experience on the lake. And because of that, for the first time since we've been doing this, what people seem to want as solutions has changed. It used to be that people really wanted just more education and awareness, just tell people how they should behave and it should work out. For the first time, we had a big increase in people looking for legislative changes and enforcement. So close to 30% of the people now say, in addition to education and awareness, we want more policing. We want to see the police boats out monitoring what's going on, and we want legislative changes. We want bigger and better rules to stop people from I guess not being respectful on the water. So this is a little bit of our education and awareness programs, and then after that I'll talk about some of our advocacy and legislative attempts as well. So around education and awareness, we distribute educational materials across Muskoka and Ontario. We support lake associations. We have a group of people who make presentations at all of the annual general meetings and the community events. We have strong social media campaigns throughout the boating season, and in partnership with our lake associations and other groups in the community. And we also proactively go out to all the municipalities within the laking areas of Ontario, which is very big. Ontario is a very big laking province. And we make presentations on our surveys, on our research, on what we're hearing are some of the issues. And the reason for that is that the municipalities are the ones who are able to try to create local rules. They're the ones who understand what's going on at their lake, at their level. And so the more that we can give them the information that we have, the more that we can collaborate together to try to make some changes and improvements in legislation or in policing. It's now, I think it's our second, 2 years ago, we created something called the Be Wake Aware campaign. And I would really recommend that you go out and have a look at it. It's a short clip. It's about 60 seconds. It's hashtag bewakeaware.com. It's on our website and on the FOCO website. And it's a video that shows in a very positive way where people should be enjoying what they like to do on the lake. So for example, it's really to address where wake boats and big boats should be, but it addresses everything to make it positive. So if you're going to enjoy the lake being a paddle boarder or a kayaker, you should do that within 30 meters of the shoreline, which is where it's protected from a speed point of view. So other boats shouldn't be in that area. And if you are a big boat, the bigger boat you are, the deeper water you should be in, and the more in the center of the lake, so that it reduces the impact of the waves and the wakes and what you might be doing to other people on the lake. So in addition to that video, we created a no wake sign, and we actually collaborated with Transport Canada to get their approval on the sign itself, so that it wasn't just kind of a rogue sign up there that we created. It was something that had been approved. And so we've got over 300 of those deployed in Muskoka and sort of Ontario area. One of the things that we've been hearing, and it's really been growing over the last couple of years, and it's in Canada and it's in the United States, is the growing concern about wakes. People are very concerned about wakes, mostly because the boats are getting bigger and the wakes are becoming bigger. And there's a whole new sport, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, around wake surfing. But the concerns around wakes are threefold. One of them is environmental. It has a negative impact on shorelines. It erodes shorelines, especially where the shoreline is very soft. It destroys wildlife habitats. Loons and other birds make their nests right on the water or on the shorelines. It has serious damage to the lake bottom ecosystems. So the energy of those waves that you see on top of the lake and then hitting against the shoreline, it's like a tsunami the way that it impacts the lake bottom. So the same kind of energy, but much greater, gets funneled down to the lake bottom. And those lakes that have fairly shallow levels and have wake boats on them are finding that the fish life and the aquatic life are dying. In fact, some of these wake boats, you can have a group of fish or plants blasted out by close to 1 kilometer when they are in full mode. So it's really quite impactful with I guess water levels that are not that high. And then also the spread of invasive species. And the reason is that those wake boats, you cannot empty the baluster. So if you move that wake boat from one lake to another, you would take any invasive species from one lake and bring it over to the other. So for those reasons, it's a huge concern from an environmental point of view. From a safety point of view, people report that they're unable to enjoy the lake safely when they're in a non-motorized watercraft, if they're fishing, paddle boating, or swimming, because the force of those waves are just so powerful that it can just topple you over and make it dangerous. And then lastly, the concern around damage to moored boats and to docks, just again from the energy of those waves coming onto the shore. The US has a little bit of a different system than us in that every single state comes up with their own solutions as opposed to a across Canada type of solution. And they have been addressing this state by state, and they've been using a lot of wake studies. The University of Minnesota has probably the most advanced in the US in terms of their various wake studies. And they are restricting wake surfing activities based on the size of the lake, the depth of the lake, and then the distance from shore. So those are kind of the 3 ways that they try to control those. The best practices so far, and they're just starting to bring these legislative changes in, but the states of Maine and Vermont are probably the most advanced in terms of the regulatory rules. Both of them have a minimum lake size to be 50 contiguous acres. So if you're not that big as a lake, then there's no wake surfing allowed, period. The lake depth must be a minimum of 20 feet, and the minimum distance from shoreline and structures is 500 feet in Vermont and 300 feet for Maine. And for those that don't remember what feet are, that's about 750 to 1,000 meters from shore. Another rule that they've enacted is that a wake boat must stay on one lake per calendar year. So they cannot go from lake to lake, potentially spreading invasive species. And based on this criteria, there are large lakes or certain narrow sections of that lake that there's no surfing activities allowed. There's some lakes that are so small that it's not allowed at all. So it's a regulatory system that means that even though you've got one big lake, the rules may not be the same throughout that lake area. Here in Canada, everything that has to do with boating on bodies of water is controlled by Transport Canada, so federal government Transport Canada. And boating includes every mode of transportation, whether it's commercial or recreational. They also control all the signage about boating. So, you know, the red, the blue, the yellow signs on which way to go on a lake, or the regulatory signs are controlled by them as well. And that was, again, part of the reason when we were creating the no wake signs that we were very interested in having Transport Canada be involved with us and to get their approval on what our signage looked like. The regulations expand to include all equipment, licensing, and speed. And provinces, municipalities, and other government cannot enact any rules of their own without federal approval, and that specifically is Transport Canada. approval. The enforcement itself, so that's the boats on the water to try to enforce what the rules are a little bit different across Canada. Some parts of Canada, it's the RCMP. I know in Manitoba that it's the RCMP. In Quebec, it's Provincial Police. In Ontario, it's the Ontario Police Force, OPP. And I believe, in speaking to Brad, for Alberta, it's also your provincial police that would own the boats for doing any kind of enforcement activity. That being said, we have investigated, and it is possible for any municipality to apply to Transport Canada to have their own policing. So if you were on a lake and you felt that everybody wanted to get together and you had the money, you wanted to have some enforcement done, that you could actually get approval and have that done yourself with their approval. So the current regulations on wakes in Canada, there's nothing that's specific to a no wake zone. So in the US, there are such things as no wake zones. There actually is no such thing in Canada. But there are regulations that can affect the generation of wakes. And most frequently that is addressed with the 10-30 rule. So a boat cannot go more than 10 kilometers an hour within 30 meters of shoreline. And you can actually, as a municipality, apply to change that. Our cottage is in Muskoka, for example, and throughout the Muskoka region, which is 3 different specific municipalities, our rules are 9-30, so you can't go more than 9 kilometers within 30 meters of shore. Some of the remedies if people break the rules are tickets for not having a driving or a fishing permit or whatever that may be. And there are also criminal codes that says that boaters cannot operate in an unsafe manner to the public. But that would take, your own kind of having to get involved to try to enact that. And it's also possible to launch a civil suit for property damage anywhere in Canada. So this is what I was referring to before about being able to, at a municipal level, try to ask for a stricter rule. So right now we have something called VORs. That's the regulations that are out there for lakes, and it stands for Vessel Operating Restriction Regulation. And some of the VOR categories that are currently available are no boats allowed, no power-driven boats, engine size limits, no towing, and no special events. And again, it's municipalities that can apply for one of those VOR category restrictions. Just last year, Transport Canada came out with a new VOR 7.1, and it relates specifically to wake surfing. So a municipality can apply to have a complete body of water restricted to no wake surfing, or they can try to do it from a distance, from shore point of view, from a depth of lake point of view, or a time of day. So for example, no wake surfing before or after sunrise and sunset. I'll speak to the VORs in Ontario because I don't know how many there are in Alberta, but in Ontario, we have 250,000 lakes, and 300 of those have requested specific VORs. So different, and in addition to the 10-30 rule, there are 300 lakes in Ontario that have their own VORs. And again, in order for you to do this, you do need to get approval from Transport Canada. The municipality needs to carry out a cost-benefit analysis, and they have to demonstrate that all the stakeholders were consulted. And by stakeholders, it would be cottage owners, it would be commercial people, it would be any local environmental groups, local governments, that sort of thing. So it needs to demonstrate that everybody was in on the discussion. And where they will allow a VOR to be put in, a special VOR to be put in, you have to demonstrate that it is to address issues around safety, i.e., we need this VOR because there's too many big boats and our lake has become unsafe, or environmental. so the damage is environmental. So you need to demonstrate stakeholders have been all talked to and discussed with. You don't have to be in agreement. You just have to come to Transport Canada saying, we've talked to all these people and this is all the views, but because of safety and environmental issues, we believe that we need this type of VOR. Up until this last year, it's taken 18 months to 2 years to get a VOR to pass, but Transport Canada has changed that, and it's now, they're saying between 9 and 10 months that you should be able to get a thumbs up or a thumbs down on a request for a VOR. We at Safe Quiet Lakes are organizing to get effective wake regulations, and we don't know if that's going to be across Canada, if it's going to be province by province. We're very much in the beginning stages of it, but we are gathering like-minded organizations and engaging them to discuss the impacts of boat wakes in Canada. This includes lake associations, municipalities, Indigenous stakeholders, paddling and other sports associations, as well as those working in the environmental movement. We've also been compiling and collaborating with scientific research. So for example, we have worked with University of Waterloo and University of Windsor the last 2 summers, helping them find locations for them to be doing research on the impacts of wake surfing boats and regular boats comparatively to wind energy. We're going to go into our 3rd year of collaboration with them this summer, and we're going to start doing some research along the impacts of wake boats on the sediments or the lake bottoms of lakes. And the goal is to implement legislation for both wake surfing and distance from shore. And we're doing this building on some success that we have had in the last couple of years around decibels, or control of boat engine noise. So a few years ago, we started the Decibel Coalition with the objective of creating decibel limits for boat motor noise. It's something that exists in the EU and in the United States and has been in existence for some time. Currently, Canada was trying to address boat engine noise through muffler regulations, which are very, very hard to enforce and to prove. And the EU and the US system with decibel limits is very easy to enforce. It takes something that's almost like how you would clock somebody's speed, and you just, with this app, click it on and you can test the decibel amount of that boat engine noise. So easy to enforce, easy to go through. In the creation of this coalition, we organized 65 organizations across Canada representing 95,000 members. We had conversations with Transport Canada, and we engaged in public consultations. We hired a government relations organization to help us for the first 3 months, and learned a lot in how to deal with the various levels of government, elected officials, administrative people, in order to make things happen and how to make changes come about. We also collaborated with OPP and with the RCMP, and we reached out to a number of US enforcement agencies. Again, we had to prove to the OPP and the other partners that this would be a more effective way of trying to police the sound of motor, and they needed to know from some of these other organizations that it was working well for them. Transport Canada last year aligned with our solution and then opened it up for public input, which is a process that's part of them putting it into regulation. That public input has closed, and it has closed positively. So we are actually now just waiting for that regulation and that legislation to go through the House of Commons, and we expect that to happen in 2025. So based on the learnings that we had and a lot of the partnerships that we created, we're now creating what we've called the Safe Wakes Coalition. And as I said, it's going to be a group of like-minded people that want to address the threats from excessively large wakes close to shore and from wind and wake surfing activities. That includes wildlife, habitats destruction, shoreline erosion, lake bottom erosion, personal safety while on a non-motorized vehicle or if you're swimming. And we believe that those solutions will be found similar to what the US is doing. It's going to be certain distances from shore, a certain size of lake, and a certain depth being as a minimum. And just to speak more to the research that we're doing around that, we have added to that Wakes Coalition and to the Safe Quiet Lakes Board a person who's a researcher, and he has investigated across Ontario. There are existing depth of water, size of lakes, all of the information that we would need, and we're creating maps that we could then look at what that would look like for a certain municipality or a certain lake or all of the province. So when we speak to the politicians or we speak to lake associations, we can say, if we made the rule no greater than 1,000 feet from shore and 20 feet, 1,000 meters from shore and 20 feet of depth, these are the lakes that it would be allowed. These are the lakes or sections of lakes that it would not be allowed. And so we feel, again, by doing that, we can have a very scientific discussion on why we think the regulations should be a certain distance based on protection of the environment and safety. And then this is the impact it's going to have for your local lake or for your local municipality. So there were some questions that were a little bit more expanded than what we cover with Safe Quiet Lakes. But I do sit on the FOCA Board of Directors, so the next couple of slides are around that. So FOCA stands for Federation of Ontario Cottagers Associations. So it is an association of associations, and we have over 50,000 member families, 525 lake associations that are part of us. And for us in Ontario, it's very impactful because we go to the province of Ontario, and when we say this is what FOCA or the cottagers in Ontario say, this is the size of the population that they represent, this is the size of the economy that represents to the province, and so this is what we want you to do in order to protect the heritage of our lakes. One of the biggest things that we do, and I've got the website here if you want to have a look at it, but we have a huge community science volunteers. They're from all the different lake associations across the province, and they are really kind of the eyes and the ears that are on the ground in each of these local laking communities to look for algae, look for lake quality issues, and to bring to our attention some of the issues that are very important to them in their specific locations. We're particularly proud of our Lake Partner Program. We have the largest Lake Partner Program across North America. It represents 628 volunteers, 542 lakes that are monitored, 923 sites that have site monitoring. And it's done in an association with a partnership with the Ministry of Environment, with Ontario Conservation and Parks, and then each of the lake associations that we represent across Ontario. So again, some of the questions were around lake capacity planning. So there's a couple of different ways that you can test it. The first method for creating planning or lake planning was done with something called a lakeshore capacity assessment. And this focuses on the amount of properties, so the amount of cottages that can be built on a lake before total phosphorus levels rise above the threshold. So they make an assumption on if there's a cottage built, it will have X amount of people in that cottage, it will have X amount of lake and lake recreational activity. That was the first way that lake planning capacity was done. But with some of the climate change issues, it's changed, and there are now phosphorus levels that are introduced that have nothing to do with people being on the lake. So it's now being seen as kind of an older way of looking at it. So the new way that people are sort of doing their lake planning is using something called the recreational carrying capacity. And this focuses on the social carrying capacity of a lake. So, and the intent of that is to ensure that the open space continues to provide an excellent recreational experience, that it remains safe and it remains attractive. And even though it's not part of the intent as they perceive it, a lot of it in the background is also around the environmental issues that recreational capacity can do. Now, these are sort of assessments that are usually done by a third party. There are people that specialize in that. I don't know who they are in Ontario, or sorry, in Alberta, but I do know in Ontario. And the municipalities that cover big laking areas are the ones that usually hire that group to go out and create these assessments. So for example, the district of Muskoka has gone through a large assessment, and they've now created a 5-year plan on all of the lakes across Muskoka on how much can be built based on these recreational carrying capacity assessments. So if you want more information on that, you can reach out to Brad, and I can put you in contact with perhaps some of our lake steward leads and staff at FOCA. And if you want to just have a look at the FOCA website, foca.on.ca, lake planning has some specific tools on sort of how to get started. I think, in terms of the message, it's really that together we can amplify our efforts on the lakes. One lake association by themselves, one municipality by themselves, one special interest group by themselves is not enough to make a change. Our regulations in Canada are federal. So, based on what we were doing with our Decibel Coalition and now with our Safe Wakes Coalition, we know that if we want to go talk to the federal government and say we need some legislative changes, we need something to be done about an issue, then we have to demonstrate that it's an issue across Canada. And by collaborating together, we'll be able to do that. So thank you for listening to me today. And I hope that, we can work together in some capacity. And as I said to Brad, I'm happy to be in contact with any of you on a one-on-one basis. If you want to send a general email, you can send it to outreach@safequiet.ca.
Great. Thanks so much, Diana. I'm sure I speak for everyone when I say you are an excellent presenter.
Oh,
and
thank you.
That was really informative. There was stuff in there that I realize now that I had wrong about how I thought lakes were managed, especially in terms of, we do have a couple lakes in Alberta on which there's no motorized boats allowed, and this makes more sense to me now how that regulation maybe came into place. So I feel very enlightened after that. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. And I apologize, I didn't realize until now I had my video off, so I wasn't meaning to talk to everybody without seeing you, but
no, that's okay. I was hooked, so no problem. There were a couple of questions that came in. One specifically was, is your no wake signage approved by Transport Canada?
Yes.
Okay, and the other question was, could you supply us with that federal legislation? So I guess they're just asking which act or which piece of legislation that's in.
There is a part of Transport Canada that's specific to recreational boating. I know nationally, her name is Honey, who's the executive director, and I know that Ontario, there's a lead for each province. So I could perhaps reach out and ask them who it is for Alberta, who their contact would be. They do have a really good website, so you can look on their website and see the rules. A lot of people don't, I guess, appreciate how much regulation that there is around the water. So for example, if you put a big water slide play zone in front of your cottage, that technically, if your cottage neighbors objected to it, could be brought for Transport Canada to come in and say that's obstructing something in the waters. The same thing with if you put your own signage out there. I know people make their own stuff up, and the rules for Transport Canada around that is if you put your own, shallow water here, whatever kind of sign that you have, you need to clearly identify your name and your contact information so that it can never be misinterpreted as a official Transport Canada type of sign. And for I guess reasons of if somebody is responsible for somebody hitting it or whatever, they want to know whose sign it is.
Great. Yeah, someone did ask, and I think you've answered this already, but we'll just repeat it in case it was missed. Someone asked, are the no wake zones enforceable? And I think you indicated they are not in Canada. So can you just comment on that again?
Sure. Transport Canada, different than the US. The US has no wake zones, and they are enforceable with usually very minor fines. In Canada, they have created these VORs that control the amount of wake close to shore, but we do not actually have a legislation that says no wake. So when I go through our laking regions, you will see a lot of signs that say slow bow down because you're in a narrow area. So it will say slow or low wake or no wake, but everybody knows it's not enforceable. It's a sign to, be considerate because you're going into a channel that's very narrow and you need to take care.
Great. Nancy, who's a quantitative ecologist in Edmonton, and she has to leave early, unfortunately. She says, thanks for a lot of good info on sound and wake challenges relative to lake size, depth, and shape, leaving behind one discussion point. Any thought to recreational wake use or recreational water use timing? Maybe loud and or large watercraft could operate on systems at certain times of day, leaving other time blocks for human-powered recreation. Do you have any comments on?
Yes, yes, absolutely. I think when I addressed the regulations, the VORs available in Canada, time of day is actually one of the things you can apply for. So I know in a lot of the smaller lakes, they will be deep enough to allow that kind of activity, but they don't want it to be before a certain time or after a certain time of day, either for safety reasons or again, just so that if people are doing night boating, they know they're not going to, bump into a big wake boat. So
great.
Yes, that is available under the VORs.
Oh, great. Okay. There's one comment here from Aaron that says in Alberta, most of the VORs are on lakes that are entirely within provincial parks. And I can think of a couple of lakes within provincial parks that say no motorized boating, for example, down in Lakers Hills. So that's interesting that maybe it's not been applied more broadly just with municipalities.
No, sorry, the restrictions. So lakes that do not allow motorized use are only in provincial parks. Otherwise, it is just the 1030 rules. And a lot of lakes are already listed under the VORs.
Right. Okay.
We have some smaller lakes in Ontario that have applied under the VORs, and they just say like we're too small, we don't want any motorized boats. And so in fact, my sister-in-law, her and her husband's cottage is on a lake that has no motorized boats allowed. So if you can prove through discussion with stakeholders and for safety and environmental issues, you could apply for that if that was of interest.
Gotcha. Someone is asking, if we get a recreational carrying capacity done, can it be enforced legally?
It has to do with your municipality. So if you're trying to do it as a lake association or a lake yourself, I would engage with whoever your municipal government is, because anything, any building permits or any rules are sort of, it's enforceable at that level. So you would want them to get on board. And I think I had referenced that the municipality of Muskoka, which is massive, it includes all 3 of our big lakes and thousands of smaller lakes, did the recreational carrying capacity, and they made it part of their 5-year plan. So anybody applying for a permit for a cottage, a permit for a boathouse, for anything, it has to fall within the rules that the municipality set out. So doing those kind of capacity assessments, I think would need a good discussion with the municipalities. And I'm not sure exactly how far the municipalities stretch in Alberta, but a lot of times there will be multiple municipalities, or a municipality will have multiple lake associations. So if there's 4 big lakes in your municipality, go talk to all of them, make sure you're all in sync. And then when you go talk to the municipality, the township, the township council, they know that you included everybody, and they will start that discussion with you. But it's a very, very good thing to do from a lake steward point of view, from just the whole our lakes in the future. If we want to have future generations enjoy what we're enjoying, there has to be some rules and some science put behind what the rules should be.
Yeah, and Alberta's probably in a slightly different situation than Ontario, given how few lakes we have relative to Ontario. So many of our lakes the entire shorelines have already been developed. And so it'd be interesting to think about how those rules could be used to limit maybe further development of communities or something like this. But many of our lakes are completely developed.
Yeah, I think if the shoreline itself has been developed, you might be better trying to create some rules around the amount of boats or the type of activity that happens on the water itself.
Yeah, interesting. I know there have been a lot of questions in the chat, but when the presentation ended, there were a couple folks with their hands up. So if you did want to unmute and ask a question, maybe put your hand up again and I can call on folks who wanted to ask that way. But I don't see any hands up currently. Let me just make sure. Okay. And I did also, during the presentation, I threw in the chat a link to the video.
Oh, thank you. That's great.
I also included a link to your recent webinar on wake research, which I thought was really interesting. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. There are a couple other questions here. Let me just pull them up. Kelsey's wondering, are you aware of any research that would highlight the use of something like a floating buffer to decrease impacts to, say, nesting birds or, shoreline erosion?
I know that there are areas, especially if they've got soft shorelines, that are trying to do that, and I've heard of it even more so in the US than Canada. If you want me to investigate that, I would go through my FOCA people. So the use of buffers to mitigate what's happening with the wakes or the waves, right?
Yeah, to protect the shorelines or nesting habitat.
Okay, I will look at that, and I will send it to you if that's okay, Brad, and then you can share that with anyone who's interested.
Sure, I can send out a follow-up email to everyone who registered today with links and resources. I know there's been an ask for some references to some research, maybe on the impact of wake on bottom sediment. So maybe I'll follow up with you and we can put together a bit of a resource list for folks.
Okay, and I think I saw somebody ask, what do you consider a wake boat? Yeah. So this is not my personal opinion. This is how it's defined. But a wake boat, as defined by in the US and Canada, is when it's artificially enhanced waves. So this isn't like a boat that's pulling somebody that's water skiing or whatever. These are boats that are specifically designed to create large artificial wakes similar to the ocean. So you can actually be on your feet, bare feet and surfing or on a board.
Yeah, that's a great description. I'm just going to see if there's any other specific. A lot of people are commenting and saying they're excited about what you presented and they'll likely be in touch. Do you have much representation from Alberta on Safe Quiet Lakes, or are you looking?
No, we would love to, especially for our Wakes Coalition. When we were doing our Decibel Coalition, we actually reached out, and probably not to anybody that's in this audience, but we had reached out and tried to find a collaboration. We had partners in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and BC, and we weren't able to get anybody on our coalition from Alberta. So I would love to have that change and we get representation on our Safe Wakes Coalition.
Great, yeah. So that's a bit of a shout out for anyone on the call today. Yeah, and I think there are a lot of people on the call today who would be excited to be involved, and a lot of the people on the call I recognize are leaders within their own lake stewardship association. So I think you'd find a lot of folks who'd be interested in contributing. My final question for you, I know you have to leave in 2 minutes here, would be how do you navigate challenges with maybe people who recreate at lakes thinking that your organization is just trying to prevent them from boating or enjoying the lakes? How do you navigate that tension?
I think every person that's on our board are cottagers, and I don't know anybody that doesn't own a power boat. We all have power boats, we all have kayaks, we all have every type of boat. And I think it's just, if you watch the video on the Be Wake Aware, I think it shows how really respectful our messaging is meant to be. It's meant to be, there's room on our lakes for everybody to enjoy themselves. It's just where and when you do it so that it doesn't impact somebody else's enjoyments, impact somebody else's safety. Now, that said, our lakes on the most part are much bigger, so there is room for a big wake boat to be on one of the bigger lakes, and you can still kayak within 30 meters of shore and never worry. But on smaller lakes, I think that would be a little bit different. So
yeah, great. So there's just 1 minute left of your time here. So again, I want to say thank you on behalf of all of us for joining us today and providing such valuable information. I think you could probably give multiple webinars on this. You're clearly passionate and knowledgeable about this. And as part of our funding with the Land Stewardship Centre of Canada, we will be providing you as well with an honorarium. So we're very happy to do that. So I will connect with you following today, and we'll put together some resources and follow up for all of our attendees. So with that, Diana, I'll let you go for today. And then for the other folks, we still have time for some breakout discussions. So if you want to stick around, we'll put you in some breakout rooms and facilitate some conversation.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much for your time and for inviting me. Wonderful.
Thanks, Diana. Talk to you soon.
All the best.
Bye. Okay, so for those of you who are still able to join us, we have put together some facilitated conversations around recreation on lakes, and I have a few helpers to participate in that. So we have Kristen Latender, my colleague, and Kelsey Norton, who are going to help some of those discussions. So let me just quickly create those breakout rooms for us. Okay, just give me one moment. It takes a second to assign everyone. Okay. I'm just going alphabetically here. I'm not playing favorites, if anyone's wondering. Okay. great. And one more room to create here. Okay, so we have about 15 to 20 minutes to have a conversation within these breakout rooms. And after that, we'll come back together and we'll close out for the day. For Kirsten and Kelsey, I'll give you a warning when there's just a couple of minutes left. Okay, I'll go ahead and open the rooms and you guys can join those rooms. Hey folks, you are stuck with me. So
that's okay. He was just saying his monitor's not working, and I'm glad he said it because mine was acting all funky too. And I'm like, oh, am I watching my computer die?
Yeah, I'm using a computer that the camera's not working. So.
Oh, that's okay. No worries. I can still hear you guys totally fine. So that will work just fine for us. I'm just going to pull up the list of questions. While I do that, maybe if you are part of a lake stewardship group or you're interested in a specific lake, we'll just go around and say where we're joining from, what lake we're interested in. So maybe Rob, do you want to start?
Oh, yeah, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Rob Weedman, I'm a counselor at Parkland County. So we have Wobman, Jackfish Lake. I live at Jackfish Lake as well, and Hassey Lake, and we have lots of lakes anyway.
Yeah, you've got some great lakes out in Parkland County. You're very lucky out there.
Not very big though.
No, which leads to conflict with boaters and wakes. I'm sure. I know Jackfish Lake has a speed limit posting on it. If I'm correct.
Not Jackfish. Well, we have restricted areas, but not speed limits.
Ah, I see. Okay.
Yeah. Wobman has a restricted speed limit in the park, but not outside of that park.
Right. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Norval, do you want to mention what lake you're from?
Sure. I'm from Gull Lake in central Alberta. I happen to be in Panoka County, and the lake is shared between Lacombe and Panoka counties. And it's a lake with about 3,000 cottage properties on it, and I think our largest and oldest provincial park. So we have quite a bit of public use of the lake. And I was interested in, when you're calculating capacity of a lake, how do you get public use in there, and how do you balance that off against property owner use?
Yeah, that's such a good question. Tammy, you're next on my screen.
Is my mic working?
Yeah.
Okay, great. This is the first time an actual mic and a camera, so just needed to double check. I'm on Lesser Slave Lake with Monogamy and Snipe Lake in our area. We've got Uticuma to the north of us, and I'm the vice president of our watershed council here. So, as a representative and stakeholder of the sporting industry on the council, we're getting a lot of concerns about noise on lakes. And, just the boats not shutting it down at dawn and dusk and causing a lot of disruptions to like the residents and cottagers, because now the boats are louder than they've ever been. And so that was my interest in coming and joining in today. So if anybody has information on any regulations like decibel levels, or if there's something that we might be able to do as a study, I'd be interested in hearing what you have to say.
Yeah, and I think that's where Diana was saying there is new legislation expected to go through the House on decibel levels. So I'm curious to see what that legislation actually looks like, or what it ends up looking like.
I liked her idea of that times during the day, and she was saying the municipality can set those rules.
Yeah, I think through the VORs, municipalities can apply for those types of rules, although I'm not sure if that included decibels. We'll have to look into that.
Okay.
Renee, where are you joining us from?
Yes, we're in Wainwright, Alberta. a little lake at Clear Lake. We actually have a couple right here, Arm Lake and Schuster Lake. But Clear Lake is quite heavily populated for, it's a small lake, like it's about a half a mile across, quite deep lake. So we have lots of people, there's 130 cottage owners around our lake, so just about touching. And then we get a lot of inside traffic too from the public and stuff. So it's always a tough question how do you share the lake and how do you make the best use of it? So that's
especially in small lakes, like Arm Lake is so tiny.
Yeah. So really, really good seminar.
Yeah, good. I'm glad it was informative. Wendy, where are you joining us from?
Actually, I'm joining the same place from that Rennie is. And yes, this has been a great seminar to listen to. It's like Rennie said, our lake is heavily populated. And, you know, we have boats coming in there on the weekends. Our boat launch is packed with trailers and the noise and everything. It's an issue. Yeah. So this has been really good information. Thank you.
Yeah. Lisa. I know Lisa well. If you're able to, there we go.
Afternoon. Sorry, my computer seems to be glitching out on me today, but I'm Lisa from Grand Cache, and our lakes of concern are Victor Lake, Grand Cache Lake, and Peavine Lake. The three lakes join together, with Victor Lake being our main source of water to the town. It's got some political issues, like the MD owns one side of the lake, or the riparian area, and there is a co-op, which would be similar to like a Métis settlement on the south side of the lake. So it makes for some turbulence. That lake is only electric motors because a few years ago, a truck with diesel fuel in a tidy tank had broken through the water and the tidy tank was leaking. And that's when people realized it was our only source of water for the community. So the town at that time had made arrangements with the province to restrict gas engines, but it is linked by a diversion channel, and that diversion channel is to Grand Cache Lake, and that lake is allowing gas engines on it. But because of the depth, we have a lot of concerns with it. So the wake presentation was really good for us because we've been discussing to develop a watershed plan that we would like to have Victor Lake reduced to just kayaking and boats that you could carry onto the lake. And then we were going to push the more motorized activities to Grand Cache Lake, but now with the understanding of the wake issue, I feel like that might be something we're going to have to again relook at. Just because our concerns mostly lie for the fact that we are right in the mountains, and with the Jasper fires last year, we figure that there's going to be a lot more tourism directed into our area, and the lakes here just can't sustain that type of tourism. So we're just trying to be proactive before we have a bigger problem than we can manage. So thank you very much for your time, and the presentation this afternoon was fantastic. Thanks, Bradley.
Yeah, glad to hear you're trying to be proactive. I know you're doing lots of good work up there. Robert, if you're able to unmute, where are you joining us from?
Yeah, hi. Well, my concern is with Wizard Lake and the increased amount of large wakeboard boats that are on that lake. Last year, I had a friend of mine and his girlfriend and two dogs in a 12-foot aluminum fishing boat were swamped by a wakeboard boat. Both of them were thrown overboard. Luckily enough, one of the passengers on the wakeboard boat realized what had happened and notified their captain, and the captain came over and rescued them. The wakes that these boats produce are unimaginably huge, and I think they're doing a lot of damage, not only to people who want to use the lake on paddle boards and canoes and smaller self-propelled watercraft, but swimmers and the shoreline, and they've just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. And it seems to me that the wakeboard people who are abusing the lake aren't residents. These are people who come in on a weekend or in an evening, and they don't seem to have the same care or the same love of the lake that a lot of us do who are at the lake.
Yeah, interesting. And Wizard is such an interesting lake because it's so narrow. It's just like a little strip that runs kind of, I guess, what would it be, like east to west? So the proximity to the shoreline, you're always quite close to the shoreline at Wizard Lake.
That's correct. Yeah, and it being so narrow, to have a 500-foot gap, even through the narrowest part of the lake, would be impossible for any wakeboard boat to be able to be that distance from shore.
Interesting. We also have someone joining us, the mayor of Maplethorpe from Summer Village of Jarvis Bay.
Yes, hi Bradley. I have met you before. It's Julie Maplethorpe. So I am on Sylvan Lake, and we have 8 municipalities on Sylvan Lake. We have Lacombe County, the town of Sylvan Lake, Summer Villages of Jarvis Bay, Birchcliff, Sunbreaker Cove, Half Moon Bay, and Northern. So for us, we are a larger lake, and we have all of the recreational sports and things that people have spoken about. Some of our issues, much like many others, is low lake levels this year, wanting to protect the watershed, having a massive amount of tourism that comes through, and trying to manage that. We also have concerns, of course, with warmer winters, vehicles going through the ice, things like that. So I think just in general, our concerns are no different than any that I've heard today. With some the Sylvan Lake Intermunicipal Development Plan also is something that all 8 municipalities are participating in, and have, we now have a new committee for that. So it's definitely something that I would take back to them. And I know one of the other Summer Villages, they're not in this breakout room, but Jeff Ludwig from Northern is also on this call. And there's many of us who will be attending the ALMS conference in March in Olds as well. So we'll kind of take this back and see what our next steps are. We did have someone who lived in one of our municipalities that was part of the Quiet Lakes Initiative a few years ago. So it's something that's been building here, but especially since the health pandemic, it's sort of exploded out here.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, nice to have you on the call today. Mike, where are you joining us from?
Hi, Bradley.
Hey.
I am from the MDO Wainwright, Clear Lake, with Rennie and Wendy. Yeah, so I'm really interested in the legislation on part of it. As I said, we have a lot of population during the summertime around that lake, and there is a lot of pressure on the lake. It is a deep lake, which we're fortunate about. So I'm happy you guys put this on. The recreational pressure is probably the largest pressure, and development as well, but more so the recreational aspect of it. So I'm happy you guys put this on, and it's good to hear about the legislation and who has control and what avenues we can take.
Yeah, and Clear Lake is kind of unique because it has that diving community as well. And I imagine there would be conflict between people who are out there trying to dive and people who are boating. Very good. I'm glad to have you guys here. And then finally, we have Ray. Where are you joining us from?
Oh, yes. Hi, I'm on the board of Wizard Lake as well, and from Edmonton, but we have a property at Wizard Lake. And ironically, I actually have a wake boat. So I'm a good, maybe in between conduit to bridge the gap, maybe. So we have an older wake boat. So, the challenge is actually making a proper wake. The kids don't like it because they can't really surf on it properly. Right. But I'm one of those helicopter parents, 5 kids, find myself constantly trying to save people from danger. And so my interest really lies in, and I'm a math person. I've done a lot of analysis on the lake, and you almost have to be smack dab in the middle of the lake to make sure that the wakes are safe. So the frustrating thing for me is education and enforcement. So not to be one of those guys that doesn't want anyone to enjoy the lake, but we need a way where we can educate boaters, especially as I would think it was Rob mentioned, it's the ones that don't live at the lake, the visitors. They don't really know, maybe. They need to be educated as to the harm that's being done, not just for the lake, people on paddle boards. My kids use paddle boards. Yeah, I've seen those wakes are so big. If you're on a Sea-Doo, you'll go flying, like on a dirt bike on water, right? So if we can educate, that's one thing. I'm even willing to volunteer and hand out pamphlets on a weekend. But then how do you enforce it, right?
Yeah.
In a legal way and not get yourself into a fight. So if we can do it logically, and the main goal is to educate people to keep them safe as well, that would be my goal. So I think the lake can potentially handle it, but like my boat's like 50 grand. There's boats that are worth more than some houses, like 500,000 plus.
Yeah.
Monstrous. And I do think they belong maybe in Kelowna. But if Wizard Lake Marine wants to test drive them, they should book an appointment at proper times to do that, to keep everyone safe. But my kid, I even hate saying this, but he almost got killed. He's in his 20s, and it was scary. So leave that story for another day. So I think I'm all about education and safety and awareness. And I'll use my knowledge and experience with, I guess, the wake boat to understand the other side. So keep my name in your Rolodex if you ever need someone to tap into, because I'm on the side of safety first and foremost, to the point where I'd probably get rid of my wake boat if I had to, right? But if we can find a good balance and also capacity, I have a feeling we're waiting until, unfortunately, someone gets injured till the county will do something. There's some times when it's beautiful outside and nothing else to do. Holy smokes, I'm sure people have seen how busy it can get at Wizard Lake. Just absolutely crowded.
Yeah, and it's impressive. A lot of the monitoring work we do on these lakes happens during the weekday, and so we most often are seeing the lake at its least busy time. Like we don't want to be out monitoring on a Saturday morning when the lakes are extremely busy. And so I know like Jackfish Lake, Wizard Lake, sure all of your lakes on a weekend look very different than they do on, say, like a Wednesday morning, right?
Yeah. And also just to add, we try to take the kids out on weekday evenings. And then on weekends, you kind of use the wake boat, just don't fill it and just tow the tube behind kind of thing, right?
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. Interesting. I'm curious from the group here, are there any topics related to what we talked about today that you would like us to delve into further, or find another kind of expert or advocate to present, say, at our next meeting in February? Is there something specific like enforcement, or you want to hear from the researcher who's talking about wake impact? What is it? I see Norval, you've got a comment.
Yeah, I did have a comment. Like, I'm very interested in this question of lake capacity, because I know like on Gull Lake, we're a very large lake, but we're pretty busy already. And, like 30 years ago, there was a lake management plan which recommended a much lower amount of development around the lake than we currently have. And yet whatever criteria that we're using, we've obviously have been forgotten. So I find that lake capacity and how you balance between private landowners like myself and the public that come out on the weekends with the big wakeboard boats, how you balance those two different groups. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great
also
point.
I'm also a wakeboard boat owner, but just like Ray. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why I asked Diana at the end, like, how do you navigate this piece without completely alienating everyone who wants to go have fun on lakes? And so it was interesting to hear from her as a boat owner herself. Rob, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I'm also a wakeboard owner, a boat owner. We have a house in BC, so we go out there a lot, the lakes are a lot bigger. I don't put my wakeboard boat on Jackfish Lake. I'm not opposed to banning wakeboard boats if we can prove that they do that much damage, and I know they do. I don't think we need to prove it, but I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story. We used to have a cabin in the bay at Wobman, and many years ago, we used to water ski in there. I'm 63, and I water skied in there ever since I was pretty well able to stand up. One day, the provincial or federal government came out and put a speed limit sign in there of 8 kilometers an hour. The next day, there was no more water skiing. So I tell people this, and I say that's how easy it can happen. although I haven't seen it happen since on most lakes, but maybe it does. So I think the moral of the story is if you abuse the lakes, somebody higher than us is going to come and step in and do something about it. And I guess from a municipal point of view, I heard the term the county didn't enforce or doesn't want to enforce. We don't have a lot of jurisdiction on the water. And I think one of the things I would love for you guys to do is to put something together that says what the jurisdiction of the federal government is, the provincial and the municipal, because right now our staff can't do anything in the water unless they get the authority to do so. And most municipal governments don't want to go there. It's too much work. It's a lot of hassle. And we get overridden by DFO and Alberta Environment. So that's my wish, I guess.
Yeah, I was impressed to see the amount of resources that Safe Quiet Lakes has put out that we don't have in Alberta. Like I think we're really behind on resources to inform people. And also, I like your idea about a simple chart that shows where the jurisdiction is for different levels. I haven't seen that before either, so that's a great idea.
In BC, the rural or the municipality that's adjacent to the lakes, in my case, Sycamore, BC, Shuswap Lakes, they have a little bit of jurisdiction. They can tell you where you can anchor. They control anchorage buoys, and a lot of that. I think we can do that here, but I don't see anybody doing it. And I'm not sure we want to, unless we get more manpower, and we're going to have to figure out how to pay for that.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just going to see if I can broadcast a message to all groups. And I'm going to call everyone back to the main room so we can wrap up. Thanks for coming to the breakout room and sharing your thoughts, everyone. I will close this room and I'll see you back in the main room in a second. Let's see, I don't actually know how to do that. Let me see if I can figure that out.
We can individually hit the blue button on the bottom right corner that says leave as well.
Let's all as a group do that. Okay, thanks guys. Okay, so all breakout rooms have been given a minute to come back to the main room. So we'll just let everyone do that.
Can I ask a completely random question from Norval, please? I sit on the Association for Summer Villages of Alberta also, and Gull Lake is sort of within my region, and I'm wondering if you can tell me when your election dates are this year so I can report back. Oh, you're on mute.
You're on mute, Norval.
You mean election dates for summer villages?
For Gull Lake specifically.
Well, Gull Lake, of course, has 4 municipalities that affect it, Ponoka, Lacombe, and 2 summer villages. I think all of our municipalities in Alberta have their elections this fall, I think.
So summer villages are different. They usually run in the summer. So I'll reach out to the administration offices.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I don't have the answer to that. I'm not in a summer village.
No problem. Thank you.
Okay.
Welcome back, everybody. I think, let me just check. I think I can actually see who's still in a breakout room. Some people might have stepped away and they're still in a room. Okay, great. That was a great discussion in our room. We got to meet everyone and talk a little bit about what the local issues were at their lakes. We had a lot of folks in our room who owned wake boats and but we're very open to this conversation and interested in learning more. Kelsey, just a couple sentences from you, what you heard from your room?
Yeah, lots of representation from Wizard Lake and some experience on kind of boat safety. So I think best foot forward is definitely kind of next steps, how to bring in all the different entities from all levels and having all the stakeholders present to make it productive and inclusive, because at the end of the day, I think this was a big piece is everyone has a right to access their water body. So making sure that, you know, all voices are heard and that the engagement and everyone's included at the early stages is a good step forward. So yeah.
Great. And Kirsten, any takeaway from your group?
Yeah, we had some great conversation as well. I think I can echo a few of the things that you guys have said already. I think to highlight a couple of things, like we had some good representation from different people. But I think education is really important, you know, when it comes to the noise on the lakes, the boats, you know, being too close to shore, the speed limits, stuff like that. That there just needs to be a better way to kind of like teach people and say, hey, like, let's be a little more considerate, not so ignorant about certain things. And then also to highlight just a little bit about the non-motorized, like, you know, paddle boards, kayaks, canoes, stuff like that, because that's pretty big. And, you know, it's kind of hard. There's the swimming area and then there's the boating area, but there's not really like a safe space for them as well. So yeah, really great conversations.
Great. I do have oh, sorry, Don, are you saying something? I think you're muted.
Yes. One quick one. You realize the problem of noise and inconsideration is a 365-day problem. In the summer, it might be boats, but in the winter, it's ski-doos and
yes,
and they are perhaps noisier. Most of them are fine, but there's some guys that have taken their exhaust pipes off or their mufflers off, and they are just so noisy, and they're all near shore. There's not a 30-meter safe zone for these things. So we got to remember that, and it'd be nice if they would just stay out a little ways from the shore, because there's a lot of kids playing tobogganing, skiing, etc.
That's a great point, Don. We didn't even discuss winter recreation on lakes, and I know issues around leaving garbage and huts and stuff in the winter is another challenge. I have another meeting in 2 minutes here, so we'll just go ahead and close out today's session. Obviously, a big thank you to Diana, who gave the presentation today. I thought she was really well spoken and really knowledgeable, and we have lots to take away from her presentation. And of course, Kelsey, my partner in crime on the Stewardship Community of Practice, thanks for being here. Kirsten, thanks for leading a breakout room. Really appreciate it. We have 2 more meetings before the end of the fiscal year here. So we'll be planning to host one more meeting in February and one more meeting in March. Within our room, we talked a little bit about what people would like to hear more about, and we heard that they'd like to hear more about enforcement and education, stuff like that. So stay tuned for upcoming meetings in February and March. With that, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll hopefully see you guys soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye,
Brad.
Normal. Bye.
Very good.
Thank you. Bye.
Signing off.
Yeah.